According to the book of Genesis, our original parents, Adam and Eve, were put in the Garden of Eden and lived a perfect life. But they ate of the fruit of the knowledge of good and of evil and were cast out of the garden. Now, a lot of times we look at that and try to think of it as a magic apple or figure out what was going on or try to make it real mystical. But Lewis tells us that at the core, what the fall, when we lost the Garden of Eden, what the fall was an act of disobedience. God could have given us any regulation. The fact was that rather than trust God and follow his rules, we disobeyed. And it was the disobedience that caused us to fall and to be kicked out of the original garden. Now, Lewis, who was an English professor like myself, put it a wonderful way. God created us to be adjectives, but we wanted to be nouns. Do you understand? God created us to modify him, to be an adjective, but we wanted to be at the center. We didn't want to modify God. We wanted to be our own little God. In a book Lewis wrote called The Problem of Pain, he sort of spins a myth about Adam and Eve, trying to sort of think out loud. And he describes the pre-fallen Adam as being somebody who did everything effortlessly, was able to move and control his autonomic systems. Everything came smoothly to him. Now, he did still need to obey God, but it was an easy kind of obedience. Think of a husband and wife on their honeymoon. They do have to yield to the other, but it's so easy to yield, to obey, to give yourself over to the other person when you're on your honeymoon. But after you've been married 5, 6, 7, 10 years, it's a little bit harder, isn't it? Now, because of the fall, obedience is difficult. Sometimes it causes us to sort of clench our teeth and clench our fists. But still, we are called to obey. In fact, our very purpose is to obey God, to love God as well, but to obey God. And when we don't obey God, it brings destruction upon ourselves. God doesn't just want us to obey him because he's a big bad bully and needs everybody to grovel. That's not the problem. The problem is that when we're not obeying God, we are not fulfilling our original purpose. We are actually hurting ourselves and cutting ourselves off from grace. One of the most convicting things I ever read in C.S. Lewis is in the Screwtape Letters, where a senior devil is warning his nephew, a junior devil, about the greatest dangers the devils face. And that is when a man that the devil's trying to tempt, when that man looks around and feels like God has abandoned him, doesn't feel God's presence anywhere, feels lost and alone, cast adrift, thinks that God is absent, and yet he still obeys. That is the greatest victory we can know as a human being, to obey even in dark times.